blocks, block states. Let's clear up what the differences between those are. Alright, we find ourselves back in IntelliJ once more, and in this tutorial we're going to be looking at block state properties. Now for that, we're actually going to break out the most amazing tool ever, which is going to be the PowerPoint slides. That's exactly right. So we have a very nice presentation here today, and of course all of the slides, as well as the slides, basically all in one picture as a cheat sheet available to you for download in the description below. And, well, let's just start. Let's think about this. So, what is a block and what is a block state? I mean, a block is just a block. Well, yes, but inside of the code, the block actually acts as a sort of singleton pattern. That means that when we think about the modBlocks class, for example, or the blocks class for vanilla, there ever only exists one field for a particular block. We never create a new block for the sand, for example. New block sand, something like that. That doesn't exist because the actual block, like I said, single pattern only exists once, but the block states, those are sort of the instances of a particular block inside of the world. So a block state saves the block position, the block properties that we're assigning in the modBlocks class, for example, and then also the block state properties. And this is basically the focus of what we're going to be talking about in this tutorial here. So block states, like I said here, are saved by the world, and they can only be changed by the world or the level, you know, depending on, of course, at this point in Forge 1.17.1, it is called the level. So you have to use level.setBlock or world.setBlock, and then you have to supply some parameters to basically set the block there. So that's sort of the difference between a block and a block state. Now, block state properties, or how to store data in blocks, it's not quite that, but it's sort of this. And the example we're going to be looking at in just a moment is going to be the RedstoneOreBlock, because that one is the easiest to actually take a look at, because it doesn't have too much stuff surrounding it. Because usually when a block in vanilla has some block properties, block state properties, then it also has some other stuff associated with it. So as you can see, it has a public static final Boolean property that is called lit, and that is equal to the RedstoneTorchBlock.lit. So there is a sort of Boolean property, and Boolean, of course, made true or false. That should be fairly self-explanatory. So defining a block state property happens in the block class, right? So we have to have a block class where we define this as a field. And then we have to also call the create block state definition, or override that method here, and then add every property that we add to the builder. So that's very important. And there's some other stuff. For example, a property always has a value. It can never be null. A block can have multiple different properties. Of course, that's no issue whatsoever. And this is really cool, those block state properties are then used to refer to different models inside of the block states JSON. Now, we've seen this before with the stairs, with the doors, all of that, these non-block blocks, so to speak. We've seen that. And we can, of course, also then change the appearance inside of the world. So, for example, when we have a RedstoneOreBlock that is lit equals false, then it looks like this. And when it's lit equals true, then it looks like this. So that's actually pretty cool. Now, how can we change this? Well, it actually is fairly self-explanatory, or actually fairly easy. So changing a block state works by having a level somewhere. So we have to have a level parameter, for example, or we just have to have the level set block at a particular position, and then saying, hey, at this position, the value of a particular block state property is now this. So this looks a little bit confusing maybe at first, but no worries at all. And then this 3 is just a flag. So we can think about it like, once again, changing the block state happens in the world, right? Or the level in this case, but level world, sort of, I use those interchangeably. At a particular position called pause, the position. And then the second parameter is the new state at that position. So here, this would be the old state. Then we're setting the value of this block state property to true. So we wouldn't even need this boolean.value of. This is, I think, just added by vanilla. You don't really need this. And when we're setting this to true, then this false here turns into a true. Therefore, the RedstoneOreBlock sort of turns on, is now lit. Lit equals true. The third parameter is actually just a flag that changes the updating behavior. We're going to be fine with a 3. That just means that all of the neighbors and all of that is updated as well. Right, so after having gone through this sort of a little bit of the theory, so to speak, we're now going to switch back to IntelliJ. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to press the Shift key twice and then RedstoneOreBlock. There you go. And we're going to take a look at this. And there you can see, if I zoom in a little bit, the Boolean property called lit. And we also have, should be, I think at the very bottom, there it is, the create block state definition, where the lit property is added to the builder. And there are some examples here. For example, right here, interact. So when, you know, something interacts, then we're setting the block to true. So this is exactly what we've seen here. And then there's also in the random tick method, if the actual value is already true, then we're going to set this to false at some point, right? Because you might, know this when you have a redstone OR block in the world, then at some point it actually turns off. And this is basically it, because the random tick, of course, ticks randomly. So there you go. And that's sort of the idea. Here, there's some other stuff as well. So animate tick, we only spawn the particles when the lit is true. Also something that should be like self-explanatory, more or less. So that is probably all that we really need to look in here. And now we're actually going to make our own block with our own Boolean property. So in our custom package, blocks custom package, new Java class, this is the test block. Might not be the best name, but it will suffice for the time being. This, of course, extends the block class, making sure that we choose the correct one. Then we'll hover over this create constructor matching super. And if we're annoyed with this, with the name of this parameter, we can just press Shift F6. And then usually it gives us a very nice, suggestion here. And now at the very top, we're going to say public, static, final. And this is the Boolean property, this one, called clicked. And this is equal to Boolean property dot create with the name clicked. So that's actually how easy it is to create a, custom Boolean property or custom property itself. If you middle mouse button click on this, you can see that this is a property of type Boolean. If we then press Ctrl H after clicking on property, you can see there's also integer properties and there's also enum properties. So the number one here is the direction property. However, there's also, I think, one or two other ones for the enum property. So those basically are the things that you can, put into a block. And then we, of course, also need to override the create block state definition method here. And we can just say pbuilder.add lit. Actually, not lit, clicked. There you go. There it is. If you have multiple properties, you can just change them together. So you can basically put it like this. So if this was another property, you could just do those. You don't have to call this multiple times. So that's actually pretty cool. Now, how do we change this? What are we going to do? Well, we're going to make this fairly straightforward. First of all, we're going to set a default state. So what is the default state of this test block? We're going to say this dot register default state, and there we just need to supply a block state. We're going to say this dot default block state. So this is the actual default block state, and then we're setting the value of the clicked property to false. So why are we doing this? Well, like I said, every property does always have a certain value, so it can't be null. And we're just making sure that when we set this block down, the value here is always false. Just making this sure. This should be done by, this should be the case at default. Just making sure we're going to do this just so that everything is fine. And then we're going to override the use method right here. So this one, so that we can actually basically right click this block, and then we're going to change the actual block state. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we are on the server. So once again, we're going to say is not client side. So the level is client side, and then we're negating it with the exclamation mark at the beginning. And then we're going to say phand equals interaction hand.main hand, because the use method is called for both hands, both the main hand and the off hand. And we're just making sure that this is only called once. Otherwise, we would switch it back and forth immediately. And that's, of course, not what we want. We will then save the current state in a Boolean, in Boolean just variable here, current state equal to pstate.get value, and then clicked. So this gets the value of the passed in property, and we're just then saving this in a variable. Pstate here is the actual block state that we have clicked, that we have right clicked, right? So this is sometimes a little bit confusing, you know, might be still a little bit confusing where it's like, well, a block and a block state, I still don't quite understand this. Well, we can think about it like this. We have now the test block class, right? If I set down 3 different test blocks, they are all test block, but they're different block states, right? Because if I were to right click the rightmost block and something changes, the other 2 don't change, right? So they are the objects to classes. So if you talk about this in Java terms, right, the block is a class and the block state would be an object created from that class. So that's sort of the general idea. Then we're just going to set the new block here. So we're going to say p_level.set block, and then we have to pass in the position. Now, luckily, we get the position here via the actual parameter. So position, then we're going to say pState.setValue, and then the clicked value is going to be the negated current state. So we're going to say this, and then the flag is going to be 3. Once again, the flags, I wouldn't worry about them too much. You can actually see what the flags are. There's also, I think that world.flags, we have some constants, some final values, but we're going to be fine. So as you can see, one will cause a block update. That's definitely what we want. We'll send the changes to the client as well. That's also what we want. And then you can see that there's a bunch of stuff that you can basically put in there. We're just going to keep it at 3 for the time being. When you reach the level where you need to change this, I'm fairly certain that you will be able to figure this out. Right, so the current state is just negated, meaning that if this click was true, then we're going to set it to false. If it was false, we're going to set it to true. So it's basically sort of a on and off switch. That you can think of it as that. Right, that's actually the test block class done. So that's pretty much what all it is. All of this is, of course, also available to you in the description below, GitHub repository or individual gists. And then let's actually register the block as well. So let's just make a test block here, copy him over the trapdoor, test_block. And this is, of course, now a test block. There you go. And overall, this is fine. We're going to have occlusion, though. And then the rest here I actually am fairly happy with. And then it goes to the JSON files, which are, of course, also available to you. I'm going to copy those over. They're actually not that complicated. The most interesting one of which is, of course, the block state. As you can see, we have clicked equals false and clicked equals true. So now we're actually using the block state property that we have just defined, and then we're pointing to a different model inside of our models folder right here. So either normal or clicked. So that's actually fairly cool, if I do say so myself. Let's also add the translation here, just so that I don't forget this. I usually do forget it, or I can forget it. Test block, there you go. And then a block model also going to be copied over. So those are, of course, 2 in this case, the clicked and the normal one, but they are now fairly straightforward. They're just cube all with a 1 texture, basically. And the normal one looks pretty much exactly like it. It just points to a different texture here. And then the item model, there's, of course, only 1. And that is where we're actually going to take a look at this as well. So this just points to the normal block model here in this case, and that's fine. And then last but not least, the textures as well. So those are, of course, also 2 and also all available. And there you go. So now we have everything that we need to, well, make this work. So I would say, let's see if it works. Alright, we found ourselves in Minecraft. As you can see, the test block has already been added to the game. Now, if I right-click this block, there you go. So it changes the property, and it also changes the texture, just like we have defined in the Blockstates, JSON, and also in the actual class itself. And I can also just, I mean, you've seen this, right? If I right-click the RedstoneOreBlock, you can see that the particles start to go, and it also gets lit up a tiny bit. I can also just step on this, and then it works for the RedstoneOreBlock as well. But those here are really the most interesting stuff. So yeah, that's actually how easy it can be. Right, so the Blockstates and blocks tutorial, this is very much a very fundamental topic. So to really make sure that you understand this, if any questions remain, please don't hesitate to ask in the comments below, and I'll try to answer every question the best I can. Otherwise, this would be it for this tutorial right here. I hope you found this useful and you learned something new. If you did, I would very much appreciate a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more tutorials just like this one. So yeah.